Hello, I am Simon Waterfield. I'm a historical writer and storyteller. One historical person I've written several stories about is my maternal grandfather, Harry Kay. For reasons that will become apparent, I've given him the title of the Kilted Tommy. These are stories about his experiences fighting in World War One. This particular one is called The Kilted Tommy's Christmas. When did you last pass Christmas in a very muddy, icy, wet hole in the ground? Well, my first of four such consecutive Christmases took place in 1915 just outside a little Belgian village called Luz. I had just turned 18 the month before. It was turning out to be a rather momentous year for me. I had volunteered into Kitchener's army that April. Despite me being born and bred Mancunian, the army, for some reason, put me in the 8th Battalion Seaforth Highlanders, a Scottish Highland regiment. I was, however, immensely proud to wear the kilt. I did my basic training on Salisbury Plain. I made some close friends during training and they became my comrades. We were shipped over to the Western Front in July 1915. Since then, we've been fighting the Germans outside this town and not really getting anywhere. Our first major battle was on the 25th of September this year, when we made a strong advance with my battalion to the fore, but we couldn't hold the advantage. And since then, we shelled and attacked the Germans and vice versa, but all to no avail. It was a wet autumn, which turned out to be an even wetter and colder winter. All of us, first of all, hoped that war would be over by this first Christmas, and we would be celebrating the winning of the war over a wonderful Christmas dinner at home with all the family, glad to be out of the army again and back together with my sweetheart Annie. When we realised this was a forlorn hope, we all wished for home leave. There I will be for a couple of days celebrating with my family over a nice Christmas spread, just enjoying the all too short stay with the family and, of course, Annie. But as that was not happening either, we wished we'd be on reserve duty, away from the front line, away from the shelling, the snipers, the mud, away from the trench rations, able to sleep under cover in billets or in a tent. At least we would be warm and dry and relatively clean. In reality, I was on sentry duty in the forward trench. It was Christmas Eve and lightly snowing and mostly frozen. I had already had quite enough of white Christmases. But at least because it was frozen, I was not standing shin deep in mud. And you might think a 5 foot deep trench would be sheltered from the wind. Not a bit of it. A bitter wind whipped down the trenches, making my nose run, making my ears feel like they were on fire. And despite the knee-high socks and knee-length kilt and a full-length greatcoat, it was very cold where a Scotsman hangs his sporran. But at least it was quiet and it was pitch black. There was some sporadic shelling a lot further up the line. The German snipers were quiet, and so were ours. My mind drifted back to previous Christmases. We never had a tree at home. There wasn't room. There were my parents and us three boys living in a small 2 up, 2 down terraced house with a lav in the backyard. But mother and father did bring out Christmas decorations and made the living rooms very homely. We went to chapel on Christmas Eve and again on Christmas Day. and there were always presents, although very modest. Mother was a good cook, and Christmas dinner was always delightful. I would be out seeing friends too, but especially seeing Annie. The desire to have one of those Christmases just now burned deep in my heart. I had heard stories about last year's Christmas on the front from one soldier who had joined up the day war broke out. He talked about the fact that on Christmas Eve, something wonderful happened. The Germans started calling out over no man's land, wishing the British happy Christmas. Some of them stood on the trench wall and talked. Others came out into no man's land and encouraging the British to do so too. And in the end, they talked together, shared food together and cigarettes, and had a drink and even played football, all on no man's land with no shooting or anything. The junior officers had allowed it, probably because they were missing their own Christmases too. We all knew this year that it was not to be allowed, not under any circumstances. Our captain had addressed us on this very point, making it extremely clear. Still, it was quiet. Perhaps there was something of a Christmas spirit floating over no man's land. Men in the trenches were trying to keep warm, walking up and down, flapping their arms around their bodies, stamping their feet, cupping their pipes and lit cigarette ends in their hands, anything that might take the edge off the cold. The only good thing about the cold was it stopped the myriad bodies and bits of bodies left out in no man's land from rotting and smelling. That was such a relief. And there had been a delivery of post and Christmas parcels that day. But it was our bad luck that they arrived after sundown, and with no lights allowed in the front trench, the men, me included, were desperate to open them, to see what had been written and by whom, and what had been sent and by whom, and hoping that somebody had at least sent them some knitted socks or gloves or a muffler to help keep warm. I knew I had a couple of tins with little gifts in. What was going to be in them? Cigarettes, chocolate, soap, a keepsake from Annie, perhaps. I'd have to wait and see. We'd all sent cards home, and I sent Annie a special token of my love. I'd taken a regimental tunic button and fashioned a pin on the back so she could wear it like a brooch to remember me by. I didn't tell her I had to take it off a dead soldier. If I admitted I'd lost one of my buttons, I would have been in trouble. Still, I thought it was a nice present. And we've been told at midday tomorrow there was going to be a half-hour cessation of fighting, where we'd have the chance to have some Christmas food and read our mail and open our gifts from home. And we knew that our captain would have a chaplain with him. A couple of prayers would be said, and perhaps a Christmas carol sung. I smiled ironically in the dark, imagining us singing the carol, Hark the Herald Angels, during that all too brief cessation. Singing the line, Peace on earth, a mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled, before immediately recommencing shelling, machine gunning, bayoneting, gassing, and otherwise murdering the Germans who were just 20 yards away from us. Well, I thought, never mind the line gone as sinners reconciled in that carol. When will the Germans and the Allies be reconciled? Now that would be a really great Christmas present.